What if the life that you've been waiting for is on the other side of doing something alone? Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a lot of firsts of mine. I'm going to tell about my first solo flight, my first long distance drive, my first solo hike, and my first solo camping trip. I just want to preface this by saying that this really isn't just a travel story. This is a story about confidence, fear, freedom, and becoming the person I needed. And maybe this will help you become the person you need to be too. We all need to feel inspired, and that is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. Welcome back to Roxy's World Adventures podcast. I am your host, Roxy, and this is a personal story of mine. It's really many stories put into one, but I am doing this just because I want to help the people that want to travel and have just waited around for other people. So I just want to help the people that are that were feeling like me. Okay, so I felt like I was just trapped in a routine, and I don't do very well with routines. I like to shake it up a little bit. I like to have something different going on every day. Now, I do have my non-negotiables every morning. I meditate every morning. I do some sort of exercise, whether it be in the morning or during the day. I have to have some sort of exercise in, whether it be a walk, whether it be, a run or anything along those lines. It has to be in the mix. And I also have to do some sort of project, some sort of new something, whether it be a post on Instagram, whether it be seeing a new account, or any of the above, reaching out to somebody new. Just having something that's out of the ordinary happening every day. Every day is different, which is great for me because that's how I like to live my life. Honestly, I was waiting for the right timing. I was waiting for the right companion to come with me. Usually it was whoever was down for anything at the time. I was like, oh yeah, I know you like to do X, Y, and Z. Let's go do that. When in reality, I could have just gone and done it by myself and met people along the way. I was also waiting for the right circumstances. So again, waiting for the weather to be nice. I mean, sometimes you can't avoid the rain. It is what it is. You got to find something to do. And I came to the realization that that was keeping me stuck. At that point in time, I was working in an office. So you can only imagine just sitting at your computer. I felt like I was trapped in a cage, and I just felt like I was stuck in the certain area that I was in at the time. And still to this day, I found myself doing that sometimes and feeling like I'm stuck. And then I'm like, okay, I got to get out. I got to travel. I got to go do something. I don't care if anyone's coming with me. I'm going to go do it. But that kind of thought process came on slowly. So I had to take baby steps to get there because I was stuck in this fear because this fear is always kind of embedded in our personality from a young age by society. And society has given it to our parents, to our grandparents, all the way up. And even in the news today, we always kind of had that embedded into us because it all thrives on fear. And honestly, that's how our culture is. But I've always been that person to challenge cultural norms, and not saying that I would do it disrespectfully, but to the point where I'm like, I want to have my own thought process. I want to see if there's something different that I can do that would make me feel better. Generally speaking, I mean, traveling solo is really not a widely practiced thing, and it's very frowned upon by people. And everyone has their own comfort zone. Sometimes it's not for everybody, but I'm here today to help the people that would like to get out of that safe comfort zone and reach new heights, because really growth begins when comfort ends, and that's just the way it is. Eventually, my fear of being alone was outweighed by my fear of never truly living. And I ended up going out more by myself. Now I'm going to go into my first solo flight. I reached out to one of my friends, one of my best friends at the time. Her name was Charlene, and she lived down in Mississippi. She lived in Biloxi at the time. And I had reached out to her and I was like, I'm having a really difficult time. I wish I could come down there and live with you, essentially, is what I said. And she was like, well, why don't you come down and visit? And I thought about it and I was like, well, and my excuse that I came up with was I don't have any money, which honestly was true. I was a college student at the time. And so I was just kind of, I don't know, I didn't have a lot of the funds to spend to go down there. And so she was like, you know what? How about this? When you graduate and you get a job, you can pay me back and I'll buy you the ticket to come down and visit me. And I was like, I mean, I can't do that. And she was like, I already bought it. So you're going. And I was like, okay, I guess this decision was made for me. So I was immediately anxious because this was my first solo flight. So I'd only been on 2 other flights in my lifetime. And the first one was when I was, I don't even know, months old, maybe a year. And I was flying with my mom, and I don't even remember being on the flight. And the other one was Charlene's wedding in Jamaica, which I'll get to some stories in Jamaica at another time. This is my first solo flight. I'm really anxious. I hope I know what I'm doing. And they included layovers. So this was the first time that I had ever dealt with a layover before. So I wasn't quite sure how everything worked. And I went to my mom and I was like, hey, do you have any advice for me? And she was like, well, if you get lost or if you don't know where you're going, just go up to one of the people at the desk and they should be able to point you wherever you need to go. Usually they're nice, so you can just ask them. And I was like, okay. I was still super anxious. And I still am to this day when I fly. Even when I flew solo across the Atlantic, I was nervous because I mean it was my first trip across the Atlantic and by myself. So it was like a whammy all in one. But back to this solo trip, what I was getting into is usually before I go on my trips, before I get on the plane, I have a drink. I love traveling. I don't like public transportation as much, but I've gotten used to it throughout traveling. I just like to be in control of where I'm going and what I'm doing. So that's something that I've gotten used to through a public transport. But I was very anxious. I walked through the airport alone. I was able to find where I needed to go. So I was like, oh, this is kind of easy. I should be able to figure this out. So I get on the flight. Taking off was terrifying because I always hate taking off. Taking off is my least favorite part of any flight. However, landing is my favorite part, which is weird because you would think it would be my second least favorite because usually those are the times when accidents happen. But landing is my favorite part because I know I'm going down. I don't know if I have a fear of flying anymore. I don't think it's necessarily a fear, but I do feel uncomfortable on a flight. I don't like being up in the air. I just don't like it. It's not really a fear per se. It's just something that I'm not really a fan of, but I have to do it to get places, especially across the sea, in a timely manner. So anyway, I realized I was taking off and I had layovers both ways in Detroit, which, oh my gosh. Okay, so Detroit, it's the only city besides Paris and New York City where I had a bad experience. Every single time I go to Detroit, it's just like people are so unhappy there, and I don't understand why. I've never met a nice person from Detroit. So that is going into the chaos of this story. I landed in Detroit, not feeling on top of the world. I got off the flight. I'm like, cool, I got my first leg of this trip done. I'm ready to go. I go into the station and I'm like, okay, maybe I need to figure out where I need to go. So I think there was a weird transition where I had to go. the other side of the airport, if I remember this correctly. For some weird reason, there was like a weird disconnect there. So I went up to the desk and I asked where I needed to go. And the woman just stared at me. She pointed at the screen behind her. And I was just like, cool, thanks. I had to figure this out by myself. I mean, I ended up doing it, which is fine. But it was one of those things where it's like, man, you could at least just throw me a bone, help me out a little bit here. But I also needed to do that on my own. And I realized this afterwards, just to figure out how to eventually do it all the time. I ended up making it on my connection, which I think it was only maybe 45 minutes, which is wild. So I was basically trying to run across the airport to make it because I was flying Southwest and I think I was an A seating. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to miss my thing being called. And I was just in time getting there. But I was really anxious the whole time. And then once I got on that second flight, I was like, I can do this all the time. I can do this by myself all the time. And I felt this confidence come over me. I realized confidence is built through action. It's not built through certainty. You can be certain about a lot of things and still not feel confident enough to do them. Once you do them, that's when the confidence comes. So the flight back was also through Detroit. Worst experiences, always in Detroit. So we're landing into the airport and we start coming down during a storm. There's lightning and it was bumpy. And there was one section where we dropped and we were dropping for a while. People were screaming. Everyone was holding onto their seats. I mean, people were legitimately screaming. And I was like, cool, this is my second flight alone. I'm going to die. My goodness, it was so scary. And then we finally leveled out and the freaking pilot gets on the system and he's like, well, that was fun, wasn't it? We're all like, fuck you, dude. We were going to die here. I mean, people were freaking out, screaming, including myself. I was not having a good time. But yet again, this is a scenario where I was able to feel confidence after it was over that I could get through something like that. And not to mention, we had to go back up through all the clouds, getting out of there. I had to go back up in, I think it was an hour and a half layover. But I was like, I gotta go back up in this. I gotta strap in. We're going on a ride here. It wasn't as bad the second time, but it was not fun. I'll just put it that way. But that was my first solo flight. And that was my first baby step to traveling alone. My first long distance drive was going from Maryland to Cape Cod. And then I drove from there to Boston and then down to, I believe, I went down to Pennsylvania and then came back home. This was during a time where I had a car that was not going to make it. It had been my car that I'd had for years when I was in college, and it was on its last leg. I was also bartending at the time, so I didn't really have a lot of funds to buy a new car. So I decided to rent one and drive a rental. And my mom was extremely concerned. She was like, oh my gosh, you're doing this all by yourself. I don't understand why you're doing this. Again, something that we all grew up with and something that's put into our culture that, bad things are going to happen if you go alone. And I was a little anxious, but as I said, I had flown by myself. So I was like, driving a car is no big deal. I can do that. I consider long distance over 4 hours, essentially. It was really good for me to take a trip like this, to get out of my comfort zone and spend hours alone with my thoughts. Maybe do a little musical therapy, which actually music is my therapy. I love music. I spent hours in the car, right? Because I want to say it's 8 or 9 hours to get to Cape Cod. I was going to South Yarmouth to visit my aunt. And we were going to go over to Martha's Vineyard, which we did. And it was so fun. We rented scooters and we drove them around the island. It was really fun. But anyway, driving up there, I was alone with my thoughts. There were times when I was afraid. We'll just say drivers in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York City, mainly, are not the best. Very aggressive. I thought I was going to die on the Jersey Turnpike. When it goes from Jersey to New York, and there's that little stretch there. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And there's like 8 lanes, and people just go across all 8 lanes just to get off and exit. It's terrifying. But I got used to that area, and I go through that area a lot now. There were some challenges. I basically had to decide where I was going to get gas. I was also not feeling well. So there were times when I had to stop for water and food, and especially water, and just kind of take a break and then go back to driving. But I made it there and we had the best time. And then I drove to Boston to visit my cousin who lived there at the time with his girlfriend, now wife. Yeah. They lived right outside of Boston. I went to a cemetery right by their house because I like spooky things, the usual. And I also went to Salem. That was awesome. I loved Salem. So I went down there and explored a little bit. And then I drove to my friend Vic's house in Pennsylvania. And then from there, I went home. And the whole drive back, I was just in a blissful state of mind. I felt like that a few times before, but nothing gets me more blissful than when I'm driving. And that was brought into a reality from that trip. And now I try to take trips down to Skyline Drive and stuff like that, where I can just drive and see all the beauty out there. I love doing all the scenic drives in any park. If any park has a scenic drive, or if any area around has a scenic drive, I will take it and drive it till the cows come home. I am one of those people that just finds bliss in it. There's a lot of time for reflection when you're driving, and where most people think it's a tedious task. And a lot of people have road rage. There's a lot of road rage on the East Coast, but where a lot of people find that, I find quiet reflection, especially on scenic drives where there's not a lot of that going on. I learned to trust myself through all of that. Even the terrifying moments on the New Jersey Turnpike, I was just like, okay, I trusted my instinct. I didn't get in an accident. I'm good. I understood from that moment forward that solitude can actually become a teacher and not something to be feared. My first solo hike was interesting. I was in need of a break. I had been working for 7 days straight. This was, it had to have been 5 years ago now. I needed a break before my event in the afternoon. I decided I was just going to go and get onto a trail. And there was a trail in Harford County. It's a trail that's regularly used by college students up there. They actually have a hiking class as a part of their Parks and Rec degree, which is pretty cool. They hike that trail all the time. So I ended up going to this trail, and I remember stopping at the trailhead, and I was just like, do I really want to do this? I had forgotten my hiking boots, so I was wearing sneakers, which, as I've said before, please do not wear sneakers on an unpaved trail. It's just not a good idea. Some of these trails can be slippery, and sneakers are really not the best bet. But anyway, I was wearing sneakers, and I was like, should I do this trail? I don't even know if I should do this. I'm just gonna go. So I ended up going. I ran into some college students, but they were just hiking. They weren't a part of the Parks and Rec group. And they were like, oh, are you hiking out here for your college degree? And I was like, no, I'm just out here trying to take a break. And they were like, oh, that's awesome. And I was just like, okay, cool. I just kind of felt like everyone that was on the trail wanted to be on the trail, and they were kind, and nobody was sketchy, and it felt very welcoming. And I was initially nervous, but then getting those reactions that happened near the beginning and then really seeing the full extent of what the trail had to offer, I was blown away. And having worked for 7 days in a row and then having that just calming and healing presence of nature, it really helped me move forward with my day. I felt like I could really just relax in that moment, even though I was moving and exercising. I just felt really blissful. And I realized that there was a lot of silence on the trail, except for the sounds of nature. I wasn't getting text messages. I wasn't constantly having that overstimulation that I normally get because I'm in a sales job. So I'm usually quite overstimulated. And I realized that I learned a lot about myself through just having the resilience and patience and self-trust to get myself on that trail. And I realized that nature does really heal what overstimulation destroys. My first solo camping trip was 3 years ago. I drove all the way down to Skyline Drive. And then I drove that to Blue Ridge Parkway. And then I drove Blue Ridge Parkway all the way down to Asheville. And I camped in Pisgah National Forest. And that was my plan. I was going to do that and then explore around the area the next day and then continue my drive down to Atlanta to meet up with my friends for a music festival. Because as I said, music is also my therapy, as is nature. And there's a lot of similarities, right? Because the people that love music are also very happy and welcoming for the most part. So this drive started, I woke up at like 3 and I think I left the house at 3:30 and drove down there so that I could be at Skyline Drive at sunrise on the first big overlook that was facing the sun. And sure enough, I was there and I talked about this on the podcast with my friend Ty. And if you guys aren't following him, Price Hunting and Outdoors is his channel. But I was talking about how getting there and just seeing the sun peeking out. So it was a little cloudy, but the sun just kind of like peeked out. So different rays of red were coming out over, and it was just such a perfect moment. And I was like, this is exactly where I need to be. And the whole rest of the trip, I was just like, this is exactly what I needed to do. I did it. I did the whole thing. I drove all the way down, and then I got to Pisgah National Park. When I actually got all the way down, on the way in, I saw a sign that said that black bears were active in the area because it's a preserved area for them. It was like, this is the time of year where they become most active. Oh, great. I'm like, cool. I'm basically going in to be bear food. This is great. And I'm by myself. And I have no service. It ended up being very peaceful and really nice, actually, because it did drop down into the 30s. So bears weren't coming out in that. They would have been out during the day, and I didn't see any of them. And I got there later on in the afternoon. And so I pitched my tent, I ate some food, got a campfire going for a little bit, and I sat there and looked up at the sky and reflected on how beautiful it was. You could see every single star. And the area that I was in had like a little clearing, so I could look up and actually see the stars. It was beautiful. And I took some pictures. I took a picture of the moon and stuff like that with my night vision on my phone. Usually I have my DSLR, but I didn't have it that time because I knew I was going to the festival and I didn't want to leave it in my car or in the room because I was staying with a bunch of other people. So I just didn't want to bring expensive equipment to be lost or stolen or whatever. I just reflected on everything that happened when I was sitting at the campfire. I was journaling. And I found myself wanting to plan more solo trips. I wanted to do more. And so I ended up, instead of going back up when I left Atlanta, I ended up going up the coastline instead because I was going to go back up the highway and just go straight home. But I was like, you know what? I kind of want to see the national seashores along the coastline. So I ended up driving back up that way. Eventually, I ended up getting on the highway and going up, but I was able to see all the beauty along the shoreline going back because of those reflections that I had at the campfire by myself. I discovered a lot of peace out there. The next day, I ended up exploring Crabtree Falls in North Carolina off of Blue Ridge Parkway. And I don't even know if that still exists today. I hope it does because everyone should be able to see that place. But I'm glad I got to see it before the storms came through. And then I got to see a couple of other spots on the Blue Ridge Parkway. I went to one of the visitor centers and went to an overlook that you kind of like walk up to from the visitor center. But that was really nice. And then I went down into Nantahala National Forest and I went to Sliding Rock and I saw Looking Glass Falls, and it was just the perfect day. And then I ended up driving down to Atlanta from there. But it was just incredibly peaceful. Loneliness and solitude are two completely different things. I felt so much more connected through being in solitude than I had in years. And I made plans that I never would have made because I would have been waiting around for other people. So it was really eye-opening. And I had many lessons that I learned throughout all of my travels, and especially in these solo adventures. I learned that freedom begins when you stop waiting. You have to actively work towards getting yourself unstuck, because if you keep thinking and feeling like you're stuck, you're going to end up staying there instead of doing something about it. Confidence comes from keeping promises to yourself. If you keep going and you keep doing everything that you planned on doing, and you keep those promises that you made, you're going to end up coming out ahead. Adventure is transformation disguised as travel. I have learned so much through my adventures, and I've learned a lot of emotional stability through that too, because usually you get the high rush when you travel, when you do anything adventurous, you get that. And then I've learned to bring myself down through meditation, yoga, and just quiet reflection. I just would really like to encourage all of you to take one of those baby steps outside of your comfort zone this week and let me know what it is, because I really am curious. I want to see what you guys can do. I also want to ask you, what place changed your perspective? And would you ever travel alone? Follow Roxy's World Adventures for more stories where history, travel, healing, and the unexplained collide. Explore on.